With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Lamed Hey. We are continuing the sugya concerning the obligation of Trumas and Maisris to be separated from produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael. And as we have been explaining, that there are various stages prior to a product being completed, prior to Nigmar HaMelachton, when things are still out there in the field, then there are no restrictions at all regarding our consumption, because there's bechlal no obligation to tithe it. Once produce is considered completed, Nigmar HaMelachton, but it did not yet come into the yard, it did not yet come into the house, meaning there was no re'iyas penei bayis, even though a person is still allowed to snack from it, but you no longer can have achilas keva. You can't have a proper meal out of that produce. Once something was nigmar HaMelachton and there was re'iyas penei habayis, now rabbinically you may not even snack from it. That's intro number one. Intro number two. Being that there is a mitzvah to have oinek Shabbos, which also includes eating foods on Shabbos, so the concept of a snack, achilas aray, achilas keva, in contrast to achilas keva, doesn't exist on Shabbos. Doesn't exist on Shabbos because the fact that what you're eating, even as a snack, there's a mitzvah, it gives it that much chashivus, it's viewed like achilas keva. And therefore, if you have a product that's completed, Nigmar HaMelachton, even before you brought it back into your yard, before you brought it back into your house, even prior to the Iyas Penei Habayis, L'kula Alma, there's no, it's clear, we see this from the Mishnah, that Shabbos comes, Shabbos is koiveya lemaisras, which means that now that it's Shabbos, you may not even snack from the product. The question that we began our sugya with on Daf Lamed Alod Amid Beis is what happens if there is something that's not even completed. Not only did it not see the house, not only was it not brought into the yard, into the house, it's not even completed. Still, the question is, does Shabbos have the power to be koiveya it? A Shabbos, you no longer may even snack from it. That was the question. And Rav Nachman, who said he has a tradition, limud aruch hu biyodenu, that Shabbos is koiveya even for a product that's not completed yet. Now, Rav Nachman did not need to bring a source from the Tanoim. He felt, limud aruch biyodenu, this is what he received from his teachers. He was good. The Gemara is looking to find a source for Rav Nachman. So we brought our Mishnah. Now, our Mishnah was speaking about a different topic. And again, just quickly reviewing. When you have foods that are edible, avada, they're not muktzah, they're edible. But if you have foods that are b'chlal not edible, for example, it was common in the times of the Tanoim Amiroim that in order to preserve fruits, there was no refrigeration, many of them were dried out. Commonly figs and grapes were put up on the roof or put out on the field, and they would stay there until they dried out. Once they dried, they lost their moisture, they would be preserved, they would last much longer. Now, when you begin to dry out these fruits, in the beginning, they're completely inedible. But there comes a certain point where, true, most people would not yet eat it. It's not fully dried out, but it's quasi-edible. It's semi-edible. And the question is, that was our topic, is it muktzah? So what we learned is that if it's still in the area where it's drying out, that will render it muktzah. That means you left it out. You don't want to eat it on Shabbos. You can't change your mind on Shabbos and say, now I'm going to eat it. But, says Rabbi Eliezer, the two leniencies, only an oral declaration is enough. If a person says, I will be eating some of the product that's on my roof to dry out, I'm going to eat it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. The fact that he made an oral declaration, that means he's saying that that's not muktzah, it's mukhan, it's prepared. Not only that, he doesn't even have to specify which fruits will he be taking down. He just has to say that from what's on the roof, from what's out there in the field where there's no issue of carrying, I'm going to be taking a pound from the 10 pounds, and on Shabbos he gets to decide which pound was the one that he meant. That was the Mishnah. The nuance that the Mishnah added is that he made that declaration Erev Shabbos, but on the Shemitah year. Shemitah is a year in which there are no obligations to tithe. So the Gemara was saying, why did the Mishnah B'chlal have to speak about the Shemitah year? We're speaking about a product that's not fully dried. If it's not fully dried, it's not completed, it's not nigman malachton. Why would I even be concerned about trumas or maasros? It must be that even though it's not nigman malachton, since it's Shabbos, it's already, you have to tithe it. So the only way the Mishnah can address the muksa issue without having to deal with the ma'aser issue is by mentioning the sabbatical year. That was the attempted proof, and the Gemara countered, there is no proof from our Mishnah. Why not? Because maybe it's not Shabbos that's going to make it obligated to tithing. Shabbos is not koiveya. The fact that he is saying he's going to be eating from it, he's saying that for him it's completed. So his statement, his oral statement was koiveya, the obligation of maasros. And don't forget, if we're speaking about it being on his roof, it's in his house. Has nothing to do with Shabbos being koiveya, so there's no proof from our Mishnah. That's where we left off. Now we're going to continue on the top line. The Gemara is actually going to prove that according to Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll see, Shabbos will be koiveya. However, Rav Nachman's din may not be based on Rabbi Eliezer because we don't paskin b'chlal like Rabbi Eliezer. And ultimately, we will not succeed in finding a source for Rav Nachman, which doesn't bother anyone because he feels he doesn't need a source. He received a tradition that Shabbos, Kam Shabbos, whatever you plan to eat on Shabbos, even if it's not even Nigmar Malachton, it has to be tithed prior to Shabbos, even for you to be allowed to snack from it. We will learn Rabbi Yochanan that argues with Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yochanan, again, everyone agrees that Shabbos has the power to be koiveya. If something wasn't fully obligated, Shabbos will bring it into its full obligation, but that's only if the product is considered a finished product. If it's semi-finished, if it's not Nigmar Malachton, Rabbi Yochanan, Kam Shabbos, you have no obligation at all to tithe it. This is more or less the conversation all the way until the end of the Perek, and God willing, we'll have time in this class to begin the fifth and the final chapter, and it's a very easy topic. Here we're continuing to learn about this excessive exertion that one may not do on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. Many times you have counter values, but what about if you won't make the exertion, you're not going to have food, or you won't have a proper location to eat in? So sometimes we allow for people to do a certain amount of work, and we will contrast, we will compare Shabbos versus Yom Tov. And in our Mishnah, we're going to point out that Shabbos is a day in which we have to be a bit more stringent than Yom Tov. And what we will appreciate is on Daf Beis Amid Beis in the beginning of the Masechta, the Gemara introduced a concept that we will learn again in the fifth chapter, which sometimes goes in the opposite direction. That since Yom Tov is a day in which we're allowed to prepare food, so people, to begin with, they approach Yom Tov very leniently. There are times that the sages were more machman on Yom Tov than on Shabbos, because they said that if we will allow too much on Yom Tov, people will b'chlal say, Yom Tov is just Yom Tov, we can do whatever we want. On Shabbos, people take Shabbos more seriously, so sometimes the sages were more lenient on Shabbos. So sometimes we go in that direction, and in other times we are machmin more on Shabbos than on Yom Tov. We're going to try to find a logic as to when we say what, but let us start again on Daf Lamed Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niveh dvarim. So we left off by saying that our Mishnah is no proof to Rav Nachman, because the reason why the Mishnah needed to speak about the Shemitah year, if not for Shemitah, you would have a problem. You would have a problem. You would not be allowed to eat your figs that's in middle of being dried out because you did not take off Trumas or Maasros. But you know why you won't be allowed to eat it? Not because it's Shabbos, because you said you will eat from it. Your declaration renders that product a completed product. The Gemara says that's not correct. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he holds that if a person even actually took something to be eaten, something that's not fully ready, you are allowed at a certain point to put it back where it came from. Just you're physically taking it to eat it doesn't make it halachically considered completed if de facto it's not fully completed. And that's Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. So if taking something to eat doesn't render it halachically completed, saying orally that I plan to eat from it certainly should not make it completed. And therefore back, l'chura, we should have a proof, we do have a proof from Rabbi Eliezer to Rav Nachman that Shabbos is koiveya, even something shaloi nigmar malachtan. V'haloi, behold, moisarai chayzer. Again, just the words, that if you have a surplus of an item that was not fully completed, but you took it to eat it, and you ended up not eating it, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can put it back wherever it came from to be fully completed. And we don't say, since you took it physically to eat it, now you have to tithe it. That wherever you are able to put it back, just you being able to put it back, you're taking it loikava. So for sure, a oral declaration for sure should not be that which will make the product nigmar malachtan. It should not be kriveya, the product for trumas u'maisres. It must be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the reason why Rabbeinu HaKadosh needed to mention on the top line on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, Erev Shabbos, Shvi is because if it would not be Shemitah, you would be obligated to tithe it. So forget about this whole muksa issue. You can't eat it anyways. And why? Because of Shabbos. So you do have a proof. Tetnan, where do we find this? Are you able to put back the surplus? Are you not able to put back the surplus? So the Mishnah, a Mishnah in Meisres, is speaking about someone who takes zaysim, who takes olive, min hama'atan, from a vat. Now, they would put olives in a vat prior to pressing it. It's olives either were harvested to eat, then they're ready. But then there were olives that were harvested to be made into oil. Until it's rendered into oil, it's not a completed product. In the vat, there would be salt, there would be whatever they would put in there to make it soft. Now, a person has the right to say, you know what? Some of the olives that are in the vat, I want to eat right now. Mamish, similar to the case of the Mishnah. Something that normally, as it is, it's not completed yet, because it's still prior to it being made into olive oil, but you now want to eat it. So says the Mishnah, if you take a very small amount, you need not be worried about, do I have to separate trumas or maisres? Do I have to tithe it? No. Noitel achas vi'achas b'melach. You can take out one, you can take out another one, they would dip it into salt, and you can eat it. But that's only if they take out one and they eat it. They take out one and they eat it. This is a classical case where if something is not yet completed, eating it as a snack is not an issue. Eating it, however, as a meal, so v'im taval v'nasan lefanav asara, if he took out, according to one version, 10, according to other versions, even 2, at a time. Not he took one and he ate it, then he took another one and he ate it, and there were never 2 together. If there were 2 together, or according to our version, 10 together, that means that this is considered a kivius, this is no longer considered a snack, and now you're chayiv. It's sholoi nigmar malachton. No, you took it. If you took it to eat it, that means for you it's complete. It's not re'iyas pnei habayis. Perfect. Something that's complete prior to the re'iyas pnei habayis, you can snack, but you can't have a kava. Says Rabbi Eliezer that even when you take 10, if the vat is pure, and the Gemara is going to clarify in a moment, and the person is tamei, which means that the olives that he held are tamei, such a person will not put it back. The fact that you are unable to put it back, and you have them all gathered together, so then is where we say you're chayiv. But if min hama'aton tamei, but if the vat itself is already tamei, and so is the person, but there's no downside putting back some olives, even though he has 10 olives in front of him, it's not yet considered a finished product. The fact that he doesn't have to eat it, he can put it back, it's not even considered completed. If it's not considered completed, he can have them without tithing, even if it's a larger amount. As we explained before, nigmar malachton, there are no restrictions. Patur, because he's able to put it back. Now, before we come back over here again, what difference does it make if the vat is stored, if the vat is tummy? And but the person is tummy. If the person is tummy, it's not that he can't, he technically could, he just won't. He will not put it back, because now that he made the olives that he touched tummy, putting him back will render everything else in the vat tummy, and no one would do that. You make the prices fall if the product became tamei, and the seifa is b'ma'atan tamei, and the gavra is tamei. Anyways, it's tamei. The matzah mahadali. So bottom line is, we see from Rabbi Eliezer that even if when you take something to be eaten, if you are able to put it back, it's not called nigmar malachton. So an oral declaration, certainly, you didn't even take it. You just said, I will take tomorrow on Shabbos from from my figs that are semi-dried out. It should not make it nigmar malachton. What does it make it nigmar malachton? Why is there a maisres issue? Why did the Rebbe have to mention Shvi'is? Because Shabbos is koiveya. So the Gemara says no. That masnesenami b'muktzah tahar. The food that's on the roof is pure. The person is tamei, and therefore, if he will take it, he's unable to put it back. Says the Gemara, whoa. Our Mishnah, he is speaking about a case where he b'chlal didn't take it. That's the whole case of the Mishnah. It's laying on the roof to dry. That was the whole chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer versus the sages. The sages holds that he has to mark them. He has to take them. Rabbi Eliezer holds that only an oral declaration is enough. They're already there. And therefore, indeed, that from our Mishnah, from Rabbi Eliezer, we see that which Rav Nachman taught. Shabbos is koiveya, even for a product that's sholoi nigmar malachton. But Ella Amar Rab Shimi Bar Ashi, that what? Rabbi Eliezer Kamrat. Rabbi Eliezer at the time made the Amar Truma Kava. You're right. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Shabbos is koiveya la maisras, even sholoi nigmar malachton. But you know what? Rabbi Eliezer also says the same concept regarding other things that could be koiveya. Point is that you can't prove anything from Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer has a unique opinion. Now, what does truma mean? Again, very simple. If you have a product that's not completed, you didn't bring it into your house, there is zero obligation to tithe it, you can even have a meal from it. What happens if you, the owner, decided to separate truma prior to nigmar malachton? And for sure, prior to you bringing it home. You know what Rabbi Eliezer says? If you separated truma, now you may not eat it until you separate ma'aser rishon, until you separate ma'aser sheni. In other words, there are certain things that if a person does one thing, he brings it into the obligation of tithing. So Rabbi Eliezer that holds that if you separate truma, then you are koiveya everything else in that pile, and you have to separate all other, then for sure Rabbi Eliezer will indeed hold the same thing regarding Shabbos. But there is no proof if you don't follow Rabbi Eliezer. Where do we find the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanan, Peter Shitaraman. If you decided to give truma prior to the obligation, but you just got it out of the way. Says Rabbi Eliezer, you may not even eat a snack from it anymore. And the Chachamim are matir. And again, therefore, Rabbi Eliezer is different. But you can't prove Rav Nachman from the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, no, I'll try to prove Shitas Rav Nachman from our Mishnah, from the Chachamim. So Tashema, and our Mishnah says in the Sefer, first of all, they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. An oral declaration is not good enough to take something out of the status of Muktzah and make it into Muchan. Forget about Trumas for a second. You have to mark it. And not only that, you have to specify which ones will you be taking. You don't subscribe to Bereda. And v'yom mikan v'atkan. So let's analyze the case of the Mishnah of Shemitah for the Chachamim. Here again, Taima, the Erev Shabbos B'Shvi'is, which is why the Lav Bar Isurei, there's no obligation to tithe anything on Shemitah. Then, those fruits, even if you marked them and you made a specific declaration, it would still be inedible. Why? My Tama. Melav Mishum, the Shabbos Kava, so I have a raya from the Chachamim, because don't forget, the Mishnah mentions the case of Shemitah, even l'Chachamim. So says the Gemara, not from our Mishnah, loy, because I can tell you, Shani Hassan, Kiven the Omar Mikan va'atkan ani yoichel, l'machar, just like we said before. Maybe here, yes, there's going to be an obligation. That's because you specified the ones that you will be eating. That's different. If you specified it, then for you it's considered Gemar Malachton, not because of Shabbos. Well, if that's the case, like we had at the end of yesterday's shiur, my Iriya Shabbos afilu b'choil nami. right, then this should be an issue even connected to the weekday. So the Gemara says that's not a problem because the Mishnah mentioned Shabbos to tell you another nuance, as we spoke out, that even though rabbinically one is not allowed to tithe, not on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov, if one did it, it's not muktzah. You can't say that it's like a keli shemalachta le'isr. You can't say that since this may not be tithe, then for sure you won't eat it, and therefore it's muktzah. No. It's edible. You could tithe it. The Chachamim does not allow the person to tithe it, but if the person violated and they tithe something, it is not muktzah. Hakamash Malon, the tevel muchro etzel Shabbos, meaning she'im avar, which he should not have, and v'tiknai misukan. Bottom line is that from our Mishnah, and don't forget, the refutation that we had on top of the Amid is only Rabbi Eliezer that holds that if Moisroi Chayzer Loikava, the Chachamim don't subscribe to that. So our Mishnah cannot be used at all as a proof to Rav Nachman. Our Mishnah, the reason why there is an obligation to tithe it, not because it's Shabbos, but because you decided to eat it. Very much like the case we had on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, where if you had a parent that harvested figs to dry it, the kid took some of those figs and he hid them to eat it on Shabbos, then a cover, because he plans to eat it. So we are left without a source. Now, before we go and introduce Rabbi Yechanan, who argues with Rav Nachman, the Gemara is going to point out a contradiction between Rabbi Eliezer himself. Frek the Gemara on Rabbi Eliezer, I have a problem with his opinion. It says in a Mishnah, Trumais, that if a person is eating from a cluster of grapes, and he walks from his garden into the yard, so what have Nachamel? Before, when the product is completed, but you did not bring it in your yard, you did not bring it into your house, you are allowed to snack. This guy is snacking. But as he's snacking, he walks into his yard. When you walk into your yard or into your home, you may not even snack. So do we say that that's it, you got to stop? Rabbi Eliezer says, Yigmoir. Why? Because the Mishnah must be speaking about a scenario where the grapes are not completed, they are going to be designated for wine. You eating it now is still considered a product that's not nigmar malachton fully. And when there is no even gemar malachton, bringing it into the house doesn't obligate you not even to be able to allow to snack from it. Rabbi Yeshua Omer lo yigmar. Because Rashi says, true that we still could view the cluster of grapes as not completed, if this was designated to make wine, but the Re'iyas Penei Chotzer is koiveya even if there's no Nigmar Malachton. Now, Vaiter Choshcha B'Leil Shabbos, similarly, you're eating grapes on Friday against grapes that's not Nigmar Malachton, comes along Shabbos, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmar. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you are allowed to finish. Why? Because Shabbos is not koiveya for something that's not nigmar malachton. Now we got a problem. That's a problem because we just established that what Rav Nachman said is based on Rabbi Eliezer. It's not good enough of a proof because we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. But the Rabbi Eliezer will hold that Shabbos is koivas even for something that shaloi nigmar malachton. That seems to go against the Mishnah and Trumos. Rabbi Yeshua says lo yigmar, again, because he holds that Shabbos is not koveya for something that shaloi nigmar malachton. So what does Rabbi Eliezer hold? Our Mishnah seems Rabbi Eliezer holds Shabbos is that powerful. Koiveyas lamasid, even shaloi nigmar malachton. They are not. Answers the Gemara, Hassan keduktani taima, Rab Nassan in a Beitzah adds to the Mishnah that loy kisha amar Rabbi Eliezer yigmar means b'chatza yigmar. Once it's in the yard, you can't eat it in there. It only means that elayoytze chutz l'chatzer v'yigmar. You have to go back out and eat it. That's not negate to our topic. But the next line says Rabbi Nassan, v'loy kisha amar Rabbi Eliezer yigmar. When he says that you can finish it on Shabbos, he doesn't mean that you can finish it on Shabbos. It's not the Shabbos yigmar. Ela mamtin l'motzoi Shabbos v'yigmar. You have to wait until Motzei Shabbos. So that's a very interesting nuance. Now, if Tzvika's here, he pointed out He pointed out from the Mishnah that we had on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, if you have a fig that's completely edible, it's fresh, it's just that the owners, the parents are planning to dry it out. When the child takes that and he designates it, he hides it for her Shabbos snack, that's such a completed product that we learned Befedish in the Mishnah that you may not even eat it Matzah Shabbos as a snack. But that's because it's a bona fide nigman malachtan. It's the parents is putting it out to dry, which renders it then not completed. These types of grapes were grapes that were planted, says Rashi, in order for you to make wine. It's never considered a bona fide good grape to eat. It's never a real nigman malachtan. So if something is taka not nigman malachtan, Shabbos l'Rabbi Eliezer is koivas only for Shabbos. The moment Shabbos leaves, you can go back to eating a snack. And bottom line will be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, true, even if something is not completed, Shabbos will obligate the owners to tithe it on a level that you may not even snack from it. But not Rabbi Eliezer. We don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. We have no source, we have no proof for Rav Nachman, but Rav Nachman is not refuted. Rav Nachman has such a tradition, and that shitas Rav Nachman. And now the Gemara brings the one who argues with him. Ki asa Ravin. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he quoted the great Rabbi Yechanan that says, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Truma, like we mentioned above from Rabbi Eliezer, if something is not completed, but you decided to designate Truma, or if you brought it into your yard, not nigman malachton, or mikach, if a purchase was done. You see, there's another rule, that selling a product also renders it chashuv. You're selling it, someone is buying it. And as we'll see, some Tanoim hold that even if a product is not nigman malachton, the moment a sale was made, the sale establishes the obligation for tithing. Rabbi Yechanan says no. Even regarding mekach kulam, ein koivim, they only have the power to establish an obligation to the point that you can't even snack before you tithed it, ela b'davar shenigman malachton, only if it is a completed product. And if it's not completed, not Shabbos is kaveya, and not Truma is kaveya, and not Chatzit is kaveya, and not Mikach is kaveya. And now we're going to go through every case to see that there is a machlokes tanoim to appreciate how Rabbi Yechanan is siding with one against the other. Shabbos, now we could have said, by the way, la'afuke mi Rabbi Eliezer. So says Tosfos. We just showed that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Shabbos is kaveya even b'davar shaloi nigman malachtan, which is the case of our Mishnah. That's fine. But Hillel is also such a lone voice. Tanya, if a person is gathering fruits from one location to the other, liktsois, it has to be to dry. In other words, he gathered it to dry out a fruit or grains, whatever is left out to dry until it's completely dried out is not a completed finished product. And the Kaddish Le'amayim Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hillel la'atzmai oiser. Only Hillel holds that you can't even snack from it because Shabbos is kreveya even b'davar shaloi nigman malachton. Now, I know it's not only Hillel, it's against Rabbi Eliezer. It doesn't matter. In other words, they are lone voices. They are the minority view. And Rabbi Yechanan is saying we don't paskin like them. Daf Lamed Hamid Beis. Chatzir, as we just learned above, and here we have another case. Lafukim mid Rabbi Yaakov. We just had the Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, but he's bringing the following Mishnah. The Tanan, hamaver te'enim b'chatzeri liktsois, if a person is spreading out figs in his field, in his yard, to have them dry, you can snack from it, and you don't have to tithe it, because that's the rule. It's not yet nigman malachta. Now, here, it's not being spread out to dry in the field. It's being set out to dry in your yard. So chatzir is not koivas enough to say you can't even snack from it. And v'tani Allah, that Rabbi Yaakov is machayev. Rabbi Yaakov will hold that chatzir is koiveya l'maisres, even b'davar shaloi nigman malachton. And Rabbi Yosi, but Rabbi Yehuda, like the Chachamim in the Mishnah, hold pointed. So Rabbi Yechanan is paskening like the Mishnah, like Rabbi Yosi, but Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rabbi Yaakov. We can also say, as we just mentioned before, and not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shua, yeah. I'm sorry, and not like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua holds that chatzir is koivas b'davar shaloi nigman ha'malachtai. Truma, where do we have this concept that if something is not completed, but if the owner separated trumais, that is koiva aslamaser, that's lafukim mid Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanach, another Mishnah Maisras. Peiroi sheteraman, if a person decided to separate truma, is just the first step of truma, but they separated truma before the product was finalized. There was no obligation to do so, but they did it. Rabbi Eliezer says, aha, you separated truma? Now, until you separate all else, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, or Meiser Rishon, Meiser Ani, then Oyser le'echel mehem, even Arai, and the Chachamim are matirin. Even though you separated trumas, so what? It's loy nigmar malachton. And the final statement of Rabbi Yechanan regarding mikach, regarding a purchase, regarding a sale, is either kidetnan or we have on the side kidetanya. It says in a Beitzah, halikeach te'enem ha'amaretz. If a person buys figs from the amaretz, now just get the words chaver versus the amaretz. In the beginnings of the times of Bayis Sheni, Rabbi Yechanan Kohen Gadol saw that there's a certain lax feeling towards properly tithing your produce. Everyone would separate truma, but there were certain maisres that there was a question mark whether everyone properly did it. So a takana was made that unless you buy produce from someone who you know is called a chaver means someone who's very meticulous in tumantara, in separating all of the tithings, you have to, as a doubt, separate some tithings. You don't have to separate truma. We're not going to go through all the details right now. Meiser Rishon, you only separate to take from it trumos meiser, which you have to give to the kohen, but the Meiser Rishon itself you get to keep. V'chulei. So he says, if you buy figs from an amaretz, if it's in a place where most people are going to dry the figs and then press them into rings, in other words, in a place where most people don't eat fresh figs, so fresh figs in this location is not nigmar malachton. So the din is, you are allowed to eat from it only as a snack. However, uma'asron demai. Now, what he really means to say is that even though it's not nigmar malachton, this Tana holds that the sale brings about, right? The sale does not bring about a total obligation to separate trumas from maisers. So if you're only having a snack, you can still eat from it. But if you want to eat a keva, now that you did a sale, even though they're not dried out, but a keva you can have. Oh, now what's interesting is that when you have to separate trumas from maisers, also you don't have to separate everything. You don't have to separate truma. When you are ma'aserit, you only have to be ma'aserit as the mai. Which means that even the amaretz, who is generally lax in separating trumas from maisers, and everyone knows that before the product is final, you don't have to separate anything. You don't have to separate even truma. But people would not sell what they grew without first separating truma, even the amaretz. So it's interesting. On one hand, they were lax, but the certain rules that they kept, trumas that they kept it very good. They kept it so stringent that, again, even though this is a location where people did not eat fresh figs, so he was selling a product that's not finished yet, but he would never sell it without separating truma. So when you are ma'aserit, you only have to be ma'aserit on the level of the mai. And Shema Mina, says the Gemara, from here we see three things. Number one, Shema Mina, like Rabbi Yechanan, that even though you made a sale, because if a mekach would be fully koivas, even b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi, then you would not be allowed even to eat arai. You would not even be allowed to snack. And number two, shma mino dat roiv amei ha'aretz ma'asren hein. Shma mino ma'asren demai ma'am ha'aretz afilu b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. Gewaldik. Which is a big chiddush, and not to say that if it's davar shaling malachtoy and you bought it from an amaretz, then you have to take off all of the trumas or maisers. We never say that. Okay, so that is the shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, who argues with this? Where do we find an opinion that holds that the fact that you made a sale with produce that grew, produce, fruits, vegetables, that in itself renders this food so obligated to tithe it that you can't even snack from it? Who holds of that? Says in a Mishnah, this is called in English bartering. You're not selling for money, but I have produce, you have produce, and we're switching it. So that if I am planning to eat what I'm receiving from you, you are planning to eat what you are receiving from me. That's called zelechol v'zelechol. Or if both of us are planning to take the produce that we are receiving and we're going to put it out to dry, zeliksois v'zeliksois. So far, both of them either are viewing the product as finished, or both are viewing the product as not completed, not finished. Or that's the third case, zelechol v'zeliksois. One is planning to eat it as it is. The other one is planning to dry it out. Says the Tanach, that's not like Rabbi Yochanan. The Tana, he says all of them are obligated to tithe everything before eating it. They may not even snack from it. It's not completed, and you have cases where people still plan to put it out to dry. That's the point. The fact that you made a sale with a product, it makes it chashuv, and therefore the obligation of Trumas u'Maasros kicks in. There's a kivius, there's an obligation. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, only in the case where lechoil. No, if the product is viewed by its current owner as something that I will be eating from it as it is, which means it's nigman malachton, then you're chayiv to tithe it. But whoever is planning still to put it out liksize to dry, meaning it's not nigman malachton, here you're going to be potter, and Rabbi Yochanan rules like Rabbi Yehuda. Yavaldik. And with this we say, Hadan Allah Hamevi. So now we concluded the sugya of Trumas u'Maasros, and we're going to come back to a pure laws of Shabbos and Yom Tov. We are beginning the fifth and the final chapter of Beitzah. And again, the final topics that we have been learning was, tircha yisera or tircha shaloi l'tzoyrach, all these types of interesting concepts that we understand, but their application is very challenging, as we'll see in our Mishnah. And the Mishnah begins with a case, again, still a continuation of people who would put food items on their roofs in order for it to dry. That was a common practice then. And the case of the Mishnah is where a person had wheat or barley, says Rashi, that you'll put out on your roof for it to dry, and all of a sudden the forecast looks like it might rain. If rain will fall on your produce, it will ruin. So you now want to save your merchandise, your food, but that will demand of you to work, to make exertion, tircha on Yom Tov. So of course, if you need to make exertion to eat that on Yom Tov, it's a non-issue. Gesund to hate. Here we're speaking about a person that's not concerned for what will I eat on Yom Tov or what will I eat on Shabbos. I'm concerned with my produce not getting ruined. A very practical scenario. No, it's how much work is one allowed to do. We're not speaking about violating, transporting. We're not breaking any malachas. We're speaking about the concept that Shabbos and Yom Tov are meant to be days of rest. This is more based on psukim that we have in Nach. It's a day of menucha. You're not letting them do extra work. So says the Mishnah that we differentiate Shabbos versus Yom Tov. For this, we are more machmer on Shabbos and we allow leniencies on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, mashilin, the word mashilin means to lower. One is allowed to lower. Peiros, Rashi says, chitin and so'erin. Derech haruba through a skylight on Yom Tov. But here's the kicker. A skylight means that getting the produce from your roof into your house is the easiest scenario. Skylight means that mamash on the roof there's an opening and you lower it through the opening. That's a lot easier for you walking it down the fire escape. That's a lot easier than you lowering it with a rope to put it into a window on the side of the house. That is already considered too much work. That's the line in the Mishnah. Some exertion is allowed, too much is not allowed. Let's use the words Anashi. Look inside the Rashi in the beginning of the Perek. Mashilin peiros derech haruba. You may lower produce through the skylight. You put out chitim and siyodim on your roof, lihis yabesh, for it to dry out, and you see that the rains are mimashmishin, it's starting to concretize, the clouds are getting dark. They allowed you to exert a little bit, and to throw the produce through the skylight, and they fall down, or you can't lower it with the rope, you just push it in there. Because pushing something through the skylight, tircha, but it's not yeseda. The dafka aruba, dafka skylight, the chol aruba is milmailo lamatli betikra. The word aruba only refers to something that's mamash, like what we call a skylight. Aval chaloin, but if there's a window, going for example, normally you have a roof, and on this, like by us in our homes, and if you're standing on the roof and you want to put something through a window, you have to lower it through the side of the house. And you have to make sure with the rope that it, hits, it aligns with the window. Then you have to swing it into the window. That is something that demands what the Chachamim will coin tircha yisera, excessive exertion. And even though you're going to lose,
Rabbi, without a skylight, then you're stuck with the financial loss.
Yes, Baruch, exactly. That's what the Mishnah is saying. And I'll go more than that. Look, that's a good picture. In other words, even if you don't have to lower it, Kevin is showing a picture where you have a window, you just have to lift it. You have to lift it. That's too much work. It's only when it's a skylight and you just push it through. On Shabbos, you always have to suffer the loss. Let's go inside the Mishnah. Avol loy b'Shabbos. I'm saying it's challenging how to apply these concepts in the modern world, but at least we have the framework. Tircha, to prevent financial loss, is permitted on Yom Tiv and not on Shabbos, and even on Yom Tiv, only if it's not yeseda, only if it's not excessive, only if it's relatively minimum amount of exertion. Another din in the Mishnah, din number 2, umachasin peiros bekelim ipnei hadelef. According to Rashi, many people argue, this is also only on Yom Tiv. Something similar, you have produce, and it's about to rain, and your solution will be to cover it with a cloth. Spreading a cloth on it. It's not a lot of work, you're just spreading a cloth. You are allowed to do it on Yom Tiv. If you have barrels of wine and barrels of oil, and as we will see, that there, if it rains on the barrels, there's much less loss. Okay, so the barrels get wet, so maybe some water seeps in and it downgrades the quality of the wine. It's not falling directly on the produce. Doesn't matter how big the loss is. Same concept is that on Yom Tiv, according to Rashi, only on Yom Tiv you are allowed to worry and cover it with blankets or with other materials to prevent it from getting wet, and not on Shabbos. And din number 3, the noisten keli tachas hadelaf b'Shabbos. Here we introduce the concept of a much greater financial loss. Now, as much as we don't want to lose the produce, real estate, a home, has much greater value. It always was that way. So what happens if there's a leak in your home? There's a leak in the home, and your floors will get ruined. Your walls will get ruined. So here says the Mishnah, not only on Yom Tov, but even on Shabbos, you are allowed to put out bowls to receive the water that's leaking in. And like we're going to learn in the Gemara, even if the bowls get filled up relatively quick, and you're going to be busy Shabbos and Yom Tov emptying out the bowl, putting the bowl back. Whoever today has an air conditioning leak, that's more or less what happens. That is something that you are allowed to do, even on Shabbos, and for sure on Yom Tov. What's the difference between your home and produce? It's about what we call a big financial loss or a small financial loss. Now, Baruch, all this makes things in halacha a little bit complex, because what's going to happen if the produce that you have on your roof is very valuable? It could make a difference. If for you it's considered a great financial loss, in other words, there is in halacha this concept that the moment you're going to have a large financial loss, however you measure that, is it relative, is it not relative? It could be it's relative. Then even on Shabbos things are permitted. But the cases the Mishnah gave were 3. You're allowed to lower it through a skylight. You are allowed to cover it with a cloth only on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. If it's raining in your house, then putting out kalim to receive the water, to prevent the water getting all over the place, is allowed even on Shabbos, even if there's a lot of exertion. because if not, you're going to lose your house. Okay.
So how would it be different than how we learned from a few classes ago when there is a fire in the house that you're not allowed to save stuff out of the
Very good, very good. I'm happy you're saying that. So here's the thing. When it comes to putting out a fire is a biblical violation. One of the Lamed Tes Malachas is putting out a fire. Biblical violation, we don't care at all about loss.
On Shabbos, right?
On Shabbos. When it comes to exertion, see, that's already not, the Torah doesn't say in the that you don't do exertion on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The Torah says don't break work. Now, we have a concept that aside of the Lamed Tes Malachas, it's a day of rest, it's a day in which you're not supposed to overexert yourself. These are not biblical obligations. It's only a midrabanan. So here, there's a lot more leniency.
So if I were to block the fire, not to put it off, I'm allowed to.
So we learned in Masechta Shabbos, if I'm not mistaken, that in an indirect way, if I'm not mistaken, there was a case where you're going to put up barrels filled with water, and when the fire comes to that barrel, it's going to break the barrel, so the water is going to put out. I think that's something that you were allowed to do. Now, by the way, when it comes to a fire, just the poyel mamish, I'm not talking about people that live out there, that they have no neighbors nearby. But nowadays, fires must be put out on Shabbos, even if you know that in your home no one is there, because the proximity of houses, even here in LA, one and the other is very close, and a fire could kill someone. And even if it's a very small doubt, pikuach nefesh is something else. Okay, don't forget that. Let's go over here. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time, and the Gemara does it every now and then. Like Menakotza, we began with complicated dinim, relatively complicated dinim for the first time. We're going to go to semantics. The Mishnah uses the words mashilin, without an aleph, to lower. The Gemara is going to point out that there are many other words that are similar but not the same that could be used to express lowering. Says the Gemara Itmer, Rav Yehuda and Rav Nassan. One of them actually had in his tradition that our Mishnah uses the word mashilin the way we have it, lowering. V'chad tanei mashchilin. He had a ches in there. He added the ches in there. And Amar Marzutra, I want you to know that both versions are correct. The one who had mashilin, there was no corruption in his tradition. Don't forget, all this was learned by heart. It's amazing. They had everything by heart, and if there was a letter off, we want to make sure to get it right. But they're both good versions. And we'll prove it. Because I'm recording a pasuk in Ki Sava in the Toichecha, that even, that's like a curse, that even if a person is going to have a lot of olive trees, but they won't have any oil. Why? Ki Yishal Zeisechem. Because the trees are going to throw down the olives. In other words, the Torah uses the words Yishal for some fruit falling off a tree. That's the source of Mashilin, means to fall. To fall means to lower. That's what falling is, from higher to lower. Uman the Tani Mashchilin lemishtabish. The Tanach Mishnah Mechoides, speaking about blemishes that disqualify an animal to be used as a carbon, Hashochoil, the Hachosoil, are two blemishes that disqualify an animal. Balimum. What is shachoil? Shachoil means shenishmata yerechai, that if an animal's hip is dislocated, but when an animal hip gets dislocated, it like falls down. That's where you see the word shachoil means to lower, to fall down. And kasel means she'echad miyar chesaisav gevay mechaverei, that one hip is higher than the other. But that's the source of mashchilin. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, I want to tell you that there are other words. Now the following aren't versions that they found, but they will point out that even if later you'll find another version to the wordings of the Mishnah, they are also going to be correct. That whoever would have the words mashirin, which also would mean to lower, loy mishtabish, will not be wrong. Uman detame mashchirin, loy mishtabish. Uman detame manshirin, also loy mishtabish. Three other words that could be used for the same thing. And now we have to show how each word in another context indeed means to lower. One of the negatives that a nazir has to abstain from is cutting his hair. So nazir lo yochayf roishay ba'adama, he may not rub his hair, his head, with earth. That was a the Johnson & Johnson, whatever name of your shampoo is, that was a great shampoo. You can imagine, they would take earth and they would rub it into the hair. But you can't do that because it causes hair to fall out. So here you see that the word mashir, falling out, can also mean lowering. Again, falling and lowering here is synonymous. The Tanan, a Mishnah concerning the laws of Tum and Tara. Normally, if a utensil broke, then the broken part cannot become tummy. Even more, even if the keli was already tummy, now that it broke, the broken part is tar. But there are certain utensils that even though that like a scissor, even though a scissor comes with two blades, but even if it breaks in the way where you have now one blade and another blade, each blade is still considered a bona fide usable utensil, so it's still susceptible to becoming tummy. And the same thing is with the razor. Now, what type of razor, I don't know. If it's a double-edged razor or if it's the handle with the razor, there's many versions as what exactly razor are we talking about. But the words are that ha-shechoir, that's razor, that's the mashchirin. Now, it's amazing. Since the word shechoir means a razor, and a razor falls hairs, it cuts hairs off. So if we want to use the word lowering, we can borrow the word mashchirin. And that's still okay. It's still a stretch, but it's connected somehow with hair falling out through cutting it with the razor. But shchoir literally means a razor. A razor or a zug shal saparim, a barber's scissors, afal pishen echlaku, even if they came apart. In those utensils, each separate part is still usable by themselves, therefore, tameim. And the final, the word manshirin also means to fall. The Tanan, if a person on Shabbos got his clothing filled with water, what's the problem? Some chacham jumped into a swimming pool. Problem is that we're not allowed to clean garments on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And if I look at you walking around with soaked garments, maybe I'm going to suspect that you washed your clothing. And there are certain activities that we may not do, not to give the wrong impression. But here there's no problem. Says the Mishnah, whoever's kalim means clothing here, became soaked in water, mahalach, you can even walk in them. And don't be choishesh, that someone will suspect that you clean them on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, and the words are nashru. Nashru means your garments fell into water. That's how they got soaked. So again, just expressions of falling. Inami, another Mishnah, it says, Ezeu leket, which are one of the obligations of the part of our produce that has to be left for the poor in the Holy Land, hanoisher b'shas ketzira. If something falls at the time of reaping, that's the final word that you see that it means falling. Okay, now let's get to the content. Tonight we learned in our Mishnah, Mashilin Pedes Derech Haruba, you are allowed to lower produce preventative. You are afraid it's going to rain on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Now the Mishnah never spoke about a quantity. The Mishnah said through the skylight, which implies not through a window. Not through a window because excessive exertion is not allowed. So the Gemara takes it as a given. If there is something called excess that's not allowed, then even through the skylight, there has to be quantitatively that much produce that's called excessive. And indeed, the Gemara says, at kama, how much produce can you lower? What happens if you're a rooftop, you're living in the palace of King Solomon? You have 500 pounds of produce on your rooftop, but you can lower it just because it's through the skylight? There's got to be a limit. Now that we are saying that derech haloin loy, tircha yisera no. So there has to be a limit in quantity even through the skylight. So Amar Rabbi Zeid, Amar Abasi, or Amar Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, we're making a linkage. And the linkage will continue on Daf Lamed Vav between our Mishnah here in Beitzah, Chevre, and a Mishnah that we had in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Chavav. Let me say by heart. What did we learn in Shabbos? You are planning to give a class. People are coming to learn. And so many people came and they don't fit in your dining room. But you have a other room that is filled with storage items. Are you allowed to clear it out? The issue there is not about carrying, it's about exertion. can you clear out a location either for people to learn, or if you're invited guests, and wherever you thought they're going to fit, they don't fit. So there we also learned a limit. We learned in the Mishnah that mefanin arba v'chomesh kupei shel teven, that if you have a location that's packed with boxes of straw, you are allowed to clear out 4 or 5. In Shabbos we learned what's 4 or 5. Make up your mind. Is it 4 or is it 5? The Gemara speaks about that there. But that was the limit. 4 or 5 boxes, or of tfuah or of grains. Either it has to be for a mitzvah. Either because you need a place to put your orchim, or because people are going to learn Torah, and if they won't be comfortable and they won't have a larger location, they won't learn properly. So just like there we learned the limit of 4 or 5, here also, even though our Mishnah never mentioned a quantitative amount, it must be 4 or 5 boxes, and there were standard sizes, boxes, and look in Shabbos, Taf Kuf Chava for more details. Only that amount is allowed to be lowered through the skylight on Yom Tov. Means on Shabbos, never. Even on Yom Tov, never through a window. Whatever is allowed, there is a limit. Says the Gemara, I disagree with that. No, how can you compare our Mishnah and Beitzah and over there in Shabbos? The Dilma, Shani, Hassan, over there, the Bittel Beis HaMedrash. But over here, Bittel Beis HaMedrash or guests. Aval Hache, the Leka Bittel Beis HaMedrash, here it's only about finances. It's not about a mitzvah. Maybe even less, maybe. Loi. We're not saying nothing. The Mishnah says you could, but how can you compare? Or you can go in the reverse. Inami, Hasamaynu Tama, the Arba v'chamish kupei shari, Mishum, Shabbos, maybe over there they allowed. Another reason why here should be more stringent. Over there, it's Shabbos. Now guys, we had this line on Daf Beis Amud Beis, and it goes against what we learned in the Mishnah. The principle of the Mishnah is that for Shabbos we're more stringent, and for Yom Tov we're more lenient. Because at the end of the day, we see that God allows you to make food preparations, and mitoich, many other things. Here sometimes we say the opposite. What do we say? Shabbos is chamira. Everyone knows Shabbos, Yisur Kodesh, Shabbos you can't do anything. So therefore, there are scenarios where the sages felt no need to add stringencies, because no one will take it lightly. But when it comes to Yom Tov, since really it is more lenient, the kill v'asi lizazulebe. So again, maybe klal v'klal loy. Now klal v'klal loy doesn't mean you won't be allowed to lower anything. The Mishnah says you can lower. His point is you can't compare that case to our case. Number one, there's a mitzvah there. Number two, Shabbos. And sometimes Shabbos allows us to be more lenient. Or in the opposite. Maybe there they only allowed 4 or 5 and not more because there's no financial loss. And the halacha takes into account financial loss. But over here, since the Ika Hefsid Mamoin, maybe Afila Tuvanami, maybe they will allow for you to lower much more than 4 or 5. And therefore, he rejects this comparison. Now, we're going to conclude over here. I do want to speak out the Rashba that actually points out how do you reconcile it? Like, do we say Yom Tov we can be more lenient, or do we say no Shabbos Chamira Deloy Asalil Zilzulei Yom Tov the Kil Asalil Zilzulei? So the Rashba says very good. He says let's use Kamus and Echos when the question is whether an activity itself is allowed or not. We limit more for Shabbos, and we open up more for Yom Tov. Whether you can do something or not. Once something is allowed, and the question is in quantity, here we go in the opposite direction. We put more limits on Yom Tov, because if you're going to end up doing without any limit, then people will take the whole thing very lightly. And on Shabbos, once something is already allowed, then the Chachamim did not restrict quantity. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, because we just learned a case that on Shabbos there is a limit of 4 or 5 boxes. I get that. But this is the generally approach of the Rashba, and it fits. Kamus Echos, if it's a question whether Bechlal something is allowed or not, generally you will find that more things are allowed on Yom Tov and less things allowed on Shabbos, like our Mishnah. You can lower it through the skylight on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. But once an activity that's allowed, if the discussion is how much of it, you will see many times that on Yom Tov we were concerned that people will take the whole Yom Tov lightly, so they did put more limits than on quantity on Shabbos. We'll stop over here. A lot more of this, God willing, to be continued.